Writer's Read by LiTracey. Getting that book in children's hands.
Hi, I'm Tracey Grice, and welcome to the Writer's Read podcast. One of the quotes that inspires me in my practice as a teacher, in fact it's the one that sits front and centre of my desk at school, is written by Nancy Atwell, an internationally acclaimed author, and she says that for students of every ability and background, it's the simple, miraculous act of reading a good book that turns them into readers. Because even for the least experienced, most reluctant reader, it's the one good book that changes everything. The job of adults who care about reading is to move heaven and earth to put that book into a child's hands. And that's why this podcast exists. This episode is a special professional development edition that focuses on evidence-based practices that are being shared by experts in the field of reading. Recently, I had the great privilege of meeting one of the world's leading authorities on the teaching of reading, Donalyn Miller. You might also know her as the Book Whisperer. For passionate teachers of literacy, Donalyn really needs no introduction. But she is an award-winning teacher, author and staff development leader who has taught 4th, 5th and 6th grade language arts and social studies in Fort Worth, Texas. She is the author of The Book Whisperer and co-author of Reading in the Wild and Game Changer, book access for all kids. She's also the founder of the annual Summer Book a Day Challenge and co-founder of the Nerdy Book Club blog. Donalyn serves as Scholastic Book Fair's Ambassador of Independent Reading Advocacy. I read her first book, The Book Whisperer, around 8 years ago while I was working as a literacy advisor for independent schools in South Australia. Honestly, this book really rattled my cage and made me think deeply and very differently about the way I taught reading. Her book sat with me for about a year before I mustered up the courage to change aspects of my practice. But when I started to implement the elements of reading workshop that Donalyn shares in her book, I saw instant impact. The students responded quickly to the elements of time, choice and community, as well as the authentic opportunities to respond to their reading. Donalyn's second book, Reading in the Wild, also helped me to delve more deeply into the practical aspects of independent reading. And for those of you who have read it, you'll know that her reading wisdom just makes sense. Her work has been the turning point in my reading practice and has enabled me to develop a community of readers who love reading and who have carved out strong reading habits and identities where their lives as readers and their book choices are validated. I've just been given a copy of her yet-to-be-released book, Game Changer, where I've begun to read more about the power of book ownership and cultural and social access to books. This new book has given me even more food for thought as I continue to provide authentic reading experiences for my students. It was a bit of an understatement to say that I was excited to be invited to a breakfast where Donalyn was speaking. I'd like to give a huge thank you to Scholastic Books for their ingenious idea of establishing a Reading Leaders event so that passionate teachers of literacy can join together to share ideas. I have read Donalyn's work many times in my attempts to continually hone my practice, so I feel like her voice has always spoken strongly to me through her books. Never in my professional life did I think I'd have the opportunity to hear Donalyn speak live. Her words rang as true as they did for me the first time I read The Book Whisperer. Imagine my overwhelming excitement when I also had the opportunity to chat with her one-on-one for this podcast. We sat down in the restaurant after our Reading Leaders event, and I'm really excited to share our chat with you now. So Donalyn, we know you as the Book Whisperer, but what was the catalyst that really got you going down this path of looking at your reading practice and making changes?
Well, when I was a new teacher, I taught like the other colleagues in my department taught. We assigned book reports. We would do these novel units that lasted for weeks and weeks and weeks, and children were doing packets of worksheets and response activities. I thought that's what I was supposed to do as a reading teacher because everyone around me was doing that. But I'm also a reader, and I've been a reader since I was a child, and I could see that disconnect between a reading life at home and a reading life at school. And my students would tell me, they would come to me with their packet and say, I've finished my packet. Can I just read my book now? And if you're a reflective practitioner and a kid watcher, you have to take that kind of feedback from your students and say, oh, I may actually be creating a classroom environment that makes my students hate reading. And as someone who loved to read personally, I couldn't allow that to happen. So I went on a journey of really researching reading and writing workshop, reading theorists like Nancy Atwell and Fountas Pinnell, and really looking at what are the factors that engage children with reading success. What do those conditions look like in the classroom?
And so can you share with us what some of those conditions are?
Well, primary, we have to set aside time for children to read in the classroom as many days as we possibly can. Children who are not reading very much at school are unlikely to be reading very much at home. We also know if they're in their language arts classroom with their literacy teacher reading every single day, it gives us as teachers opportunities to check in with every child, make sure they're matched with books they can read and that they're interested in reading. And what I've found also is that culture of reading in the classroom every day, everyone reads more. It's harder to dodge reading when your teacher is doing it every single day. I had a student named Ashley in my class, and she said, Mrs. Miller, it's actually harder not to read in your class. And so I used my therapist voice like we do with kids. Tell me more about that, Ashley. And Ashley said, well, the first week of school, you had us all get a book. We were reading for 10 minutes every day. And I thought, oh, okay, this is how it's supposed to start. And then the next week you added 5 more minutes and we were still reading every day. And she said, oh, okay, she's trying to build up our reading time. And then the third week we were doing 20 minutes a day. And she said, honestly, it became harder to fake read in your class. I couldn't come up with that many ways. And she said, besides, you have some pretty good books in here. She said I wore her down like water on a stone. If we're only reading a couple of days a week, it's too easy for children to dodge us. They might reasonably not be reading at all and just looking for books or avoiding reading or fake reading 2 days a week. When we're doing it every day and we're relentless about it, I think it becomes harder for them to do that.
Absolutely. So obviously you have a significant classroom library. Can you talk more about that, the importance of it, where your books have come from? Are they consumables? How much is it valued as part of your classroom?
Well, I have 3,000 books in my classroom library. But that wasn't the first day of my teaching career. That was 10 years of scrounging. Teachers are book scroungers. We know all the bookshops that have sales, the yard sales that we can go to. I used the Scholastic Reading Clubs to order books because I got the reward from it, and then I could use that to turn it into more books. I also, when parents would ask, what did I need for the classroom, if they were mindful of wanting to contribute something, I would always say books. My daughters got very good at we would drive around yard sales in our neighborhoods and my daughters could spot the bookcases. Mom, pull over, there's a bookcase. But just years and years of scrounging for books, taking donations, using what limited resources I had to purchase them. I will tell you, I never worked for a school that actually gave me any financial support for my classroom library, which is sad because we know from research that children read 50 to 60% more in classrooms with adequate libraries. Now, this is in addition to the school library, not as a replacement of, but children need those books. There's nothing sadder than a classroom with no books in it for children to read.
So what do you say when, schools do, have financial pressure to set up classroom libraries? Well, we already have a school library or a main library. Do we need this as well? So how do the two work together?
I talk to a lot of librarian colleagues who are working hard to build collaboration with teachers. And I often see them at library conferences talking to other librarians about how to collaborate with teachers. But I wish we could get a squad of librarians to come to an English teachers conference or a literacy teachers conference and talk to teachers about how to collaborate with their librarians, because I think many of my colleagues don't get it. Most of the librarians I know were also classroom teachers before they became librarians. They didn't take off their teacher hat, they just added more hats. And often they're literacy teachers who loved books and loved the value of reading with children, so they moved into a library. So highly skilled individuals. And also our librarians may be the only people in the school who have training or experience in how to build a collection, how to, they're knowledgeable about current trends in children's and young adult literature. So any school that would be wanting to launch a classroom library initiative, I would say should deeply involve their librarian. They are probably the most skilled person in the school to do that work, work, and why would we leave our best player on the bench? We're also looking at our resources and the limited nature of those resources. So classroom library doesn't have to be books that are purchased and placed in the classroom. It could be fed or supported with supplements from the school library. So it's not about the origin, it's about the proximity. It's about having those books on hand in the classroom, because if children are reading a lot in the classroom, we can't send them to the library as many times as they need to go. The librarian would be overwhelmed with hordes of children descending on, although I think many of the librarians I know would enjoy that a great deal. But let's imagine you're a primary teacher who's teaching a unit on plate tectonics, and you have one book on volcanoes in the classroom. Working with your librarian to check out as many books on earthquakes and volcanoes as you could, bringing them down to the classroom as a supplement for that unit, using those books, and then sending them back to the library. Or you're studying World War II and you want to do book clubs or literature circles with them, partnering with librarian to get some of those books. It always enhances any collection a teacher might have. So I think there's that partnership between teachers and librarians that we need to be exploring more, and really helping teachers see the value of those partnerships. Sadly, we're losing our librarians in so many places, and I think that's so short-sighted. When I think about the need for critical literacy, the fact that books foster empathy, I think we need our librarians more than we ever have.
So independent reading is a core part of your work and what you write about and what you teach. What's the teacher's role while you see children independently reading?
There's a line of thought that teachers should be reading while the children are reading, but I don't subscribe to that, because I think we can model that we are living a literate life without using that time to sit and read every day. I see that independent reading time as an instructional opportunity. If you think about our whole class instruction, where we're standing in front of the room and we're leading all the children into a learning activity, it's probably the most efficient way to deliver content, but it's the least effective in meeting the individual needs of children. Conferring with readers, checking in with them individually may be the least efficient way of doing that, but it's probably the most effective. We're all grouping children for reading groups, for guided reading, for different things, but every time we group children like that, we're making compromises. When you put 3 children together in a group, they may have overlapping reading goals, but each one of those children is not identical to the other. So we're already making some compromises in those groups. Maybe they all share some reading goals. They all need to work on their fluency or something. But when we're working on them individually, we can focus in on that individual child. So the best use of a teacher's time during independent reading is, in my thought, walking around the classroom, talking to individual children, having them read out loud to us if we're concerned that they can't understand the book they've self-selected, guiding their book choices, giving them recommendations, connecting them with other children in the classroom who they might be able to partner with, doing some on-time, on-demand instruction on looking at a book, figuring out if they can read it, talking to them about their preferences, and how are we setting individual goals with children. So let's say, Tracey, that you're a big reader, but what I see you reading is fantasy books over and over and over again. And all year you haven't read a biography, you haven't read a poetry book, you haven't read a historical fiction book. I might say, okay, even Tracey, who's a great reader, still has some goals. So how can I use those opportunities to challenge her to read outside of her comfort zone, try some new books?
So time is the nemesis of all teachers. So how do you manage those individual conferences and group strategy instruction times as well?
Well, you don't start conferring with students the very first week of school. I think you have to set it down, that routine of the reading every single day. Also going to the library and making sure every child has a book that they can read. So it's something that you don't start right away. You have to set that culture of the reading happening. And then it's helpful with children. You know, when a teacher shows up at a child's elbow with the clipboard, the children get nervous. And when you start writing down things, they start to get nervous. Oh, I must not be a good reader. Look at what she's writing down. So I often recommend a strategy called a fishbowl. And teachers fishbowl all sorts of things. Pick a volunteer, because it is a little bit risk-taking for the child. Sit up at the front of the room, teacher and child, and have a conference in front of all the other students. and then reflect on it as a class. What did you see Mrs. Miller did? What did you see your classmate did? How is this reading conference beneficial to you as a reader? If children cannot name how that conference is beneficial to them, they don't get it. They don't understand what we're doing. And when children understand that there's a point to it, that it's not a gotcha to see if children are reading or not, and that the teacher will get around to every single child, I think that cuts down on some of the things that might make conferring unsuccessful, which is distractions from other children, or you sit down with a child and you say, let's talk about their reading, and they have nothing to talk about. From a management standpoint, I think we get overwhelmed by just the sheer number of children we have in the room. How are we getting to all of them? There are some students we check in on every single day because they need us to. They need that affirmation from us. They need the support. They might need some instruction. But just checking in on them every day, I don't think is a conference. A conference involves goal setting. Everyone walks away from a conference with a goal. The child walks away with a goal that relates to their reading. The teacher walks away with a goal that relates to the child. The more aligned those goals are, the better. And there may be days where you only meet with 2 children in that meaningful way. And I think we just have to turn ourselves over to that and not guilt ourselves about how many children we didn't get to today. If we just, a journey of 1,000 conferences starts with 1. Mm-hmm. So we just increment, if we're meeting with as many children as we can every single day, eventually we will get to the end of that class list. And then what do? We start over. If we don't give ourselves grace as teachers, how are we ever giving any grace to the children? And I would rather have those conversations be meaningful and not just box checking. Oh, I made eye contact with her. She's still reading Harry Potter 4. She's good, and checking a box on my clipboard and going away. That's not meaningful. I would rather have 2 conversations a day with some depth to them than casual conversations that probably don't actually help children.
And out of interest, how long does your reading workshop go for in one session?
So I also taught social studies along with language arts. So I had a 90-minute block of language arts and social studies. We know that the sweet spot for reading at the primary level is 20 to 30 minutes every single day, as many days as we could get it in. So I would always shoot for at least that minimum number of 20 minutes a day. And then during that time, walking around the room, conferring with children, or pulling a small group to work with during that 20 minutes every day.
How important then, after that 20 to 30 minutes of independent reading, is coming together at the end and having a reflection or share time?
Well, we know that children read more when they talk to each other about what they read. Now, we also know as teachers, we can't just say, boys and girls, you finished reading, turn and talk to the people at your table for 5 minutes, because how productive would that be? We have to model what that talk might look like. Through our own lessons, giving them maybe some talking points to discuss. Sometimes I think it's just beneficial for them to book talk with one another, recommend books to each other, especially if you see your students kind of going to the same books over and over again. Those book talking opportunities can kind of fan the flames and get them interested in some books that they might not be reading.
So we're really fortunate because we've just had a sneak peek at your new book, Game Changer. So in your new book, you talk about the importance of school and classroom libraries, as we've already mentioned, the power of book ownership and cultural and social access to books. So what do you see, I guess, in your travels and in your work, that what do we need to get better at as schools?
We need systemic support, and we know what that means, money. We need systemic support for school libraries, for classroom libraries, and for our librarians. Many teachers who I know who have classroom libraries have self-funded those collections from their own resources. It's not just an access issue, it's an equity issue. It shouldn't be a dice roll for children on who they get as a teacher this year on whether or not they have access to that resource. Oh, I got Mrs. Miller. She has a classroom library. The other grade 5 teachers don't. The discussions around the lack of diverse representation in children's literature is ongoing, and I think is a pressing concern. Our communities are becoming more and more diverse, but we also know that the media that children consume, books included, may be one of the only ways we have to give them a glimpse into the lives of people who have different circumstances than they do, to learn about our global humanity. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who's a scholar in this work, coined a metaphor that we still use. People often know at least parts of. She talks about how books should be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. So mirrors that reflect our own experiences, windows that give us a glimpse into the circumstances of another person, and sliding glass doors being pathways that connect us as a global family and give us the opportunity to walk in someone else's shoes. We want all of our children to be able to see positive reflections of their families, their cultures, their experiences in the books that they read. We also want them to be able to learn about other people who do not share the same circumstances. Sadly, the lack of diverse representation in children's literature has been a problem for a long time. And I see that that's changing. It's probably not changing as fast as we need it to, but teachers and librarians must really be a driving force in this and ensuring that children have access to those books.
So just finally, one thing that I'm fascinated with and my students are fascinated with is this idea of a reading identity and the habits that we have as readers, because often for them it's a revelation when they find out that their teacher's not always reading at their instructional level or is reading the latest IKEA catalogue that was delivered, for example. And so they feel relieved when they hear that teachers have a balanced reading diet. So they love to hear about the strengths and struggles of adult proficient readers in their life. So for you as a reader, can you share some of your habits as a reader?
I always carry something with me to read. I don't think finding time to read is really a function of time at all. I think it's a function of access. Do we have the book with us when the time appears? Many adult readers, myself included, we carry something with us to read or something to read on every single day as part of our boredom insurance. So that book downloaded to your phone or that book in your bag or that magazine or whatever it is, I've always got something with me to read because no matter what I think might happen over the course of my day, I don't want to be sitting somewhere stuck and bored with nothing to read. I travel a great deal in the work that I get to do, so I have to plan ahead for those moments. What am I taking with me? For example, for this trip to Australia, I couldn't pack every physical book that I wanted to read, or my husband and I would need a completely separate suitcase. So I downloaded audiobooks onto my phone. I'd like to listen to audiobooks as well when I'm in the rental car or traveling. Other habits, I use Goodreads, which is an online website for readers that just helps you keep track of the books that you've read and also what books I might want to read in the future, because I get a lot of great book recommendations from colleagues online and offline. And then when I go to the bookstore, I can't remember the titles of any of those books. So having that list in my phone, or I can scan books with the app and just really read a review about it. That's kind of a habit that I've gotten into. Those would probably be the big ones. I also have library cards to multiple libraries, and I've learned how to use interlibrary loan. And the poor librarians at my home library, when they see me coming, they're kind of like, oh, here she comes. What book will we be buying now that we don't have? But building that relationship with the public librarians is something I think is important for us too as readers.
And I have to say that you sharing your reading habits in your first two books that I read has really helped me to understand more about my own reading life and my reading identity and how important it is to share that with students, and has been a real inspiration in my practice. I just want to thank you so much for your work, your time today, and just the common sense approach to teaching reading that you share with educators around the world.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of the podcast. I really feel very honored. Thank you.
How do you wrap up such an insightful chat? It was amazing just to be in her presence and to learn from her wisdom. As I mentioned earlier, Donalyn's work has shaped the reading teacher I have become. I'm so grateful for her books, her openness to share, and her amazing generosity in spending time with me so that I could bring her important work to you on the Writers Read podcast. A big thank you to Scholastic Australia for enabling this chat with Donalyn to happen.
Writers Read by LiTracey. Getting that book in children's hands. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. at Writers Read by LiTracey, a Dave and the Beanstalk production.